Hello, welcome back to another Fabulous channel. I'm Jacob Books Corner, and today we are doing a vlog type sit down review video of like 14 books. That's a lot of books. As you can see from the thumbnail, it's all these books in the thumbnail. And we're gonna go over the quick TBR because just want to quickly mention it. I want to say if I look a little different, it's because this video was filmed over 3 months ago. I just haven't got around to editing it, and so I just haven't got around to doing it. But either way, I made a video at the end of last year trying to finish all the books on my 2023. I made a video at the end of 2022 talking about all the 23 books I want to read it in 2023. I did a similar thing for 2024, and we are doing a similar video, except this video will come out later on this year in similar capacity. We're reviewing all the books that are my most anticipated of the year. This was the quick roundup version of that video. So what I figured I'd do, I'd refilm the intro and outro to have a much more cleaner slate, and we can talk about 2023 overall for reading for this selection of books. I would say the only book I did not get to, so I only read 22 books total in this selection, was Dragonfall. I wanted to mention it here. I heard it was great. There was great queer rep, so I do recommend it. I was told to recommend it to people from people I know, so I'm recommending it to you. I just could not get a hold of a copy to save my life, so I didn't get to read it. If I get a hold of a copy, I will read it. That being said, the TBR for this video, the amount of books that you're going to be going through, there are going to be chapter times linked down below in case you want to jump to a specific review. None of these books have spoilers in them at all, so and if they do have spoilers, the screen will turn this color. It'll be really quick, really short, but that way you know. Being so, let's go ahead and jump into the TBR. So in this video, I read for you Broken Perfect Lies, The Riding Retreat, Brother and Sister Enter the Forest, The Witch and the Vampire, A House with Good Bones. We also read In the Lives of Pupets, Happy Place by Emily Henry, Yellowface by Ralph Kwong, Pageboy by Alia Page, Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong, and then Family Lore by Lives of Pupets. All those books will be featured in this video, probably in the order I just read them to you because they're in the order that I told you, so I'll review them in that order, even though if I didn't film in that order because I don't think I did, but it doesn't really matter. And that being said, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Once again, there are chapter times linked down below with an outro going over all the books on this list in case you want to know my full opinions and thoughts. It's going to be kind of a long one, but hopefully you have a good idea. Hopefully I remember what my thoughts are. That being said, enjoy the video. You guys are actually do the whole update for Broken Perfect Lies. I'd like to mention I'm wearing a unicorn. It has nothing to do with anything, especially about this book, but I have a unicorn on my face. Okay. Also, really grateful for this novel for the last like 200-ish pages of the book, just because it's really helped me through an extremely hard time. The book is not a 5 though, I will say that much. I was really hoping, and for the majority of the book I would say it was probably a 5. I would say probably up until the 90% title, and I was like, oh, it's not a 5. There are just a few things I just don't think people cross, and I think there's a few things that were crossed without spoilers. There might be slight spoilers, if so it'll be the very end, but I'm gonna tell you my non-spoiler thoughts first. This follows a cop singer named Parker, or Riker Ray, and she ends up before the book even begins, she ends up at a wedding where a huge stalker who's been prevalent in her life before ends up killing and murdering her old bodyguard, but also several other people at this wedding. And so he ends up getting arrested, and she ends up walking out, but she is really mentally distraught, but she has to find a new bodyguard. She ends up running into a guy on the street named Keith, who has no idea, but their path is about to cross a lot as he is hired for this new bodyguard position without any expertise in it whatsoever. And I think that's where the grace needs to be given, just a little bit, but like not a lot of grace. Okay, not a lot of grace. So that's her thing. She's going through this huge trauma of losing someone who was extremely close to her. Her old bodyguard was like a father to her, and she feels extremely responsible because, well, she kind of is, but you know. He has a sister who was in a car wreck before the beginning of the book, who's in the hospital, who has been in a coma for several months and is going through like extreme debt with his mom and like all that other stuff. And so they're both having a lot of huge emotional trauma going on throughout the book and with the relationship at its forefront. She also just got out of a long-term relationship about 3 or 4 years, 2 years, I think it was like 3 or 4 years. And her entire family, outside of her family, her entire life, everybody that's known her as Parker had never known that she was Riker Ray either. These are all things that are divulged really early on in the novel. So she basically lost everybody and everything because it wasn't actually spoiled that that's who her name was until her ex told the press that's who it was. That's everything I got for you. Another little, like, tiny little tidbit of information that I thought was interesting. It is connected to another series of Katie's. Very limited, but also makes a lot of sense. When you read it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Once again, this is another book. Has to deal with musicians, and that's all I'll say. Speaking of musician sequences, I'll quickly talk about that, and then we'll jump into the romance, because I think those are all the things that you guys are going to care about outside of what I'm about to say for spoilers. Wait a second. So, with the actual musical aspect of the book, there are poems throughout, which I think are done really well. Obviously, I think Katie is a phenomenal, or Weismer, I don't know how to address it. But either way, is a phenomenal poetry person. I own all of her collections. I own like one of her collections like 3 times just because of different circumstances and things. Very big fan, and so I was not mad seeing the poetry throughout the books, music lyrics and stuff. And then I think some of the writing is particularly beautiful when describing either how she feels on a stage or how she feels while coming up with a melody or something. I think these are very common things, and I think done very well. Now for the romance is extremely slow burn, but I think done in a very fast-paced novel, so it seems like it goes really well. So I was not mad about it, and I was quite happy to see the romance expanded in the way it did. But it's extremely slow burn, so if you're looking for something a little more heavy and fast, this is definitely not the book for you. But I think the book does a good job of exploring it nonetheless. Honestly, I have spoilers to talk about, but it's fine. It's not a big deal. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Up until I was like, there's a few things that happened at the very end that I just thought were either very stupid or idiotic, but also like one of those things also I was really shocked was true, which is interesting. I honestly would have probably went with the angle that someone was lying instead. I think it makes a little bit more sense for the story and the characters and the reaction. So maybe it originally was, and maybe it was changed in edits, which I think is possible. That's all I'll say on the subject. Either way, another one I would recommend from K.U. Eisner. Can't wait to read Ruthless Ends in the new year to finish up the Marionette series. So that's crazy. But either way, so let's talk about The Writing Retreat by Julia Bard. Originally, I was going to do this for let's solve a slasher or whatever, thing I do. Let's solve a murder together. But either way, this was not that book. This is not a whodunit. I'm going to say it right now. It's not a whodunit. It was also not a 5. It was in my 5-star predictions for the year. Obviously, all these books were. This was a 3.5 for me personally. Right off the bat, I vibed really well with the character. I really vibed with the writing and the style of writing. And so I think I would definitely read more from this author. This is a debut novel. And I really loved how gay it is. It's so gay. And it's really like it's really coming to like figuring out your sexuality type of gay. I won't lie, the triggering stuff is quite graphic, especially when you're not really sure where some of the lines are and how far they are drawn over, because they are pretty far drawn over. Like there is a line and you're just like, oh, you're just going to continue to walk. So I do kind of recommend looking up the trigger warnings. I will have to say that almost all of them do involve spoilers. So they all do, like normally most triggers, unless it's like directly in the synopsis, it normally does involve spoilers, but almost everything that happens like towards that is, I would say, a spoiler. For the actual plot of the book, I liked all the characters. Let me give you a quick little rundown. So it's about Alex. She gets invited to go out to this writing retreat with about an author that she was obsessed with from like the time she was like 13 or 14. Her name's Rosa, and she wrote like all these like great manuscripts of these like very sexual love stories and things. Some of them very inappropriate and taboo. Some of them are like really like sophisticated and things. And so like we get experts from those. There's a lot of random pieces of dialogue and lines that you don't really know how they fit together, and then they do fit together, which is nice. I think the structure and the way that she wrote it was good, by the way. So she gets sent off to this writing retreat, and she learns really soon that Ren, who was somebody that she used to know really, really well, is also going to this writing retreat, but they had a huge falling out. And so that's part of like the drama that's going on, is this like, are they gonna reconcile, like what's going on here? And then on top of that, at this place, they soon learn that they're in a competition type of thing. They're all tasked to write a novel, and the entire time that they're there, it's like 3,000 words a day, which is a lot of words coming from a writer, and they have to turn in that evening, and they have to do all these like different tasks. It's not just like they're just writing the whole time. And if they turn in the best manuscript, they get like a whole deal. The book will automatically get published. It's like a whole thing. And so like everybody there wants to become this like writer, this like great novelist. So like that's the synopsis, that's the plot. Do I recommend? Yeah, if you're interested in writing, or if you like writing, you're a writer, I would recommend for sure. I don't think it's a full, but I do think the first like 40 to 50% of the book, which is the part that like super gelled with me, part that I wish the story would have came on that same track, or maybe went down, like I knew it was going to get weird, but I just don't think I liked where the story was headed once I realized that's where the story was headed. Almost everything I had guessed about 20 to 30% in came true, but I was really hoping that was like the outlandish goals here. I was really hoping it'd be a little bit more grounded and a little bit more centered, I guess. I don't really know. The characters were nice. I liked almost all of them. It was fun to read from all of them. A few of them were obviously unlikable, but they were supposed to be, and I found all the stories to be interesting. I just didn't really think, like, you know how I was like complimenting that that certain things do play really well. Certain things do have this like structure to it, but there's also other things that don't. Like there's like there is like, I guess there is a point to everything that's going on. I just didn't necessarily think all the points had the gravity, the weight that they should have with the build up that we had, if that makes any sense. It was not my favorite thing I've read this year. It was quite disappointing, and I can see why my brain decided to push it off for such a long time. Like, I pushed it off for a long time. But with that being said, that's the writing retreat. Today we are here to talk about this book, which is Brothers and Sisters Enter the Forest. I ain't gonna lie, I DNF'd this book already. I kind of wish I had still so I could finish it, because I think I would finish it after doing a bit of research. I must have missed something in translation. So essentially this story follows a brother and sister. The brother has a lot of problems, and there are two timelines. One when they're 16, which is still bad to be fair with what we're about to talk about, and one when they're like 35 or something. And a violent crime goes on, and with that violent crime, they are sent into this chase, this like eruption, right? I've heard nothing but really good things. I've heard it's extremely triggering, and I was trying to figure out why, and then pretty early on you get a good idea. So essentially what the main triggers here are domestic abuse, and I'm gonna say like grooming / pedophilia are like some big ones for me, just because like I didn't realize the way that they are talked about, like the younger versions of themselves are talked about, and things are extremely sexualized. I didn't really like any of the sexualness of the novel, period. Not that I don't like steamy books, not that I don't like books that have steamy content that don't belong there, and not that I don't like controversial picks that feel very, what's the word, exploitative? How you doing, a little life? Yeah, I'm calling you out again. It's not like I don't like those things, and I don't mind those things in literature. The thing here is I'm just in a very sensitive state, I think, because it's December and holidays and all this other stuff, that it just became very apparent I just was not here for it. I was like, I'm not really here. So I DNF'd at 25%. I wish I would have known that they are older than what I thought they were. After, a little bit of research, I realized that they're 16, when a lot of the graphicness that I thought they were younger goes on. I was under the impression that both characters were like 13, 14, somewhere around there, which two or 3 years, but it does make a huge difference, especially when the character that is doing these things to them or whatever, I'm trying to be vague, but also like you can get the sense, is much older, like 3 or 4 years older, which does make a difference. And it does make a difference in the retrospect, thinking even as a 16-year-old. Not that a 16-year-old would make anything better. It could have made me more uncomfortable. I really don't know, but I DNF'd this because of content reasons, not because of the book. I didn't really like the writing super much, and I knew like really soon into the book that it wasn't going to be a personal favorite, and so I'm not mad that I DNF, but we did get to our first DNF, and that is where I'm at. With that being said, I'll update you when I have another one to talk about. Let's talk about The Witch and the Vampire by Rebecca Flores, something Flores, or maybe Flores the first name, I don't know, something along those lines. This is a very, very, and I mean very light Rapunzel retelling, and then we are moving into, like, it's set in this fantastical world of where vampires are hunted by witch hunters. Witch hunters hunt vampires. There's like certain sectors vampires can't go into. Vampires try to escape in there, and so we have our two main characters. We have Ava, and then like Kaye or something along those lines. Ava being the vampire, the other one being the witch hunter. They were really close when they were younger. She ends up disappearing. Her mom ends up dead. The mom ends up dead, so she believes Ava was the person who killed her, and so it starts this like enemies to lovers romance. I'd say this is a pretty bad portrayal of enemies to lovers, just because I'm gonna go on the limb here and say there really wasn't any much of enemies to lovers, is my opinion. I didn't like this book. We'll start that review off, right? Didn't care for it. It was a 2.75 star. I just couldn't give it a 3. I was really trying, and I couldn't bring it to me. Let me explain a little bit. So the opening was horrible. I hated it so much, to the point where I was like, oof, am I gonna DNF? No, we're not gonna DNF 2 books for this vlog. Ain't gonna happen. I didn't DNF it. You're welcome. I really wanted to. And there's another point, about 80% of the book, where I was like, I'm done. This book can end, and it did not. But it is over, thank God. The characters are fine. I just didn't really like the writing style, like, at all. I think the narrators did a good job. There's 2 narrators. I do sometimes like with 2 narrators, it is a bit annoying when one does a better voice for one of the characters, where you can believe it better than the other one, and then they have to come in and they have to do like this like voice that you just didn't like agree with. So I guess that's the only thing with the affliction and things didn't seem very right to me, but that's a narrator problem, not really a book problem. I mean, it kind of is a book problem because some of the dialogue didn't land because of it, but it was really cheesy dialogue, so I guess it's okay on note. This is a YA fantasy romancy, or it's a YA romancy. There's no steam, no nothing. I don't even, do they kiss? I think maybe they kiss. I don't think so. I don't really know. See, if they did, I guess my brain didn't really pick up on it. It's a lot of slight touches and things. Very precious, if you ask me. That book is slightly better. By slightly, I mean much better than this. Sorry, it's so rude, but it's so true. So it's hard to not, like, make a joke about it because, like, I really just didn't care for the writing here, like, at all. And then, like, everything else kind of fell away. So, like, the first, like, 10, 15, maybe 20% could care less about, right? And then the middle part was, like, so good. They're lost in a forest for, like, a big part of it, and it was palpable, and the enemies, the lovers, was like fully going at it. And then we got probably like 60% in, and then there was a switch up, which makes sense, and the switch up was horrible. It was wretched. And then the rest of the book was just wretched. The rest of the book just became predictable and like, yeah, this is where we're headed, yeah, this is what we're doing, yeah, this is what we're doing. And they try to throw in like a twist or two in here, and I think if you're not very common in reading, I think they would be really fun and exciting. But it's someone who, this is my 200th book of the year, not fun and or exciting, at least in my opinion. It could have been if the writing was slightly better. There's a lot of lines, so I was just like, oh, that's cringe, I don't like that. And I mean, coming from an author who, you know, it takes multiple drafts to really get the cringe out, and maybe, I don't know, it's been a minute since I read like full YA. Maybe I should do a whole video next year where I'm reading like nothing but YA to figure out maybe this is just normal cringe, and maybe that's what YA is. It's been a minute since I really dived into that genre. And I think any book this year that was counted as young adult, I did not really care for outside of the books that shouldn't be counted as YA, but are, I would say. Like, I like those ones. Those ones are like practically adult books, but they just are not marketed that way. The ones that are marketed truly, like, this is definitely like a book that I could see like a high schooler reading and probably enjoying. Most people on Goodreads do agree with me that it's not great, so I feel justified in my opinion here. But A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I just finished this. I read it in one sitting, so I got to give props to that. It kept my attention for the entire thing, even if I didn't really love the experience. The whole time I was reading it, I was like, okay, is this where we're headed? And then it took a weird turn. I don't want to spoil what the turn is because I don't really know what the description gives away. It could be in the synopsis. I didn't read the synopsis. I think I saw Books Mala talk about this book last year, and I was like, ooh, I really liked one of T. Kingfisher's book. I didn't care for the other. Idea another. And so I was like, we're on a mixed bag, but I'll put it on this list because maybe this is a win. Also, haunted house books for me personally are just like really hard to come by. I think some haunted house books are super fun, super duper exciting, whereas I think some other ones are very horrible. This is falling in the category of, I think it's a good recommendation. I could see myself recommending this book for quite a few years to come. Don't really know what that says about the book. I landed on a 3 out of 5. I will briefly explain what the novel is about. So it's about a woman who learns that her mother has something going on with her. Something's wrong. And so she ends up going back to her hometown and living with her mom while working on this side project for her job, which is an archaeologist. I didn't really care for the main character. I didn't really care for her motives or her things here. Also, for a book that's so reliant on how her mom once behaved, think of Goodnight Mommy, things are those lines, very different from that, but things are those lines of where I almost felt like with something under the lines of like that one I believed more, I think, because it was in a video, like a media image format, whereas this one I had a hard time connecting her with her mom, which is such an important and crucial relationship to the entire thing. There's also a subplot romance that's very minimalistic that I also didn't really care for, and I felt like kind of dragged the story down a little bit, and I really didn't like where it ended up going in the end. I felt like the horror just did not really work for me. If you are a bug phobia person, you don't like anything to do with bugs, this is not your book. Do not recommend. But overall, I would say this was not a disappointment, just I wished more from it, which seems to be the common reception online, so I'm happy I'm the only one in this camp. Overall, this was, like I said, a 3 out of 5. Essentially, we are reading read In the Lives of Puppets, which I had soon realized was a Pinocchio retelling, and I think that was a downfall. I don't like Pinocchio. Pinocchio has never been one of my favorite stories. I've never liked adaptation of Pinocchio. I've watched quite a few because everybody keeps telling me, oh, you're gonna like this one, oh, you're gonna like this one, oh, you're gonna like the gay one. I just didn't care for it. Androids in general I have a hard time connecting with. It's not my favorite type of sci-fi. I like when a droid is more like on the outskirts of the story, like maybe a sidekick, maybe a buddy, maybe the villain. I get into those, but this is more like main character territory, and it's not my favorite thing in the world. Once again, let me tell you what the story is about. It follows a man who has a human son in a world filled with robots. The son grows up and he ends up having like a makeshift family of robots that he has created, and it really is about their time and their lives together. Very similar vibes to our T.J. Klune books, especially in the same genre of this, the cozy fantasy sci-fi vibes. They venture back and forth. I wouldn't call this sci-fi fantasy at all, but the generalness, the coziness is there that you would expect. It's a bit more darker, more underlines of T.J. Klune's, I would say, romance side of things, where I'd say his romance side of things get a bit more darker. But in every T.J. Klune book I've read so far, I think there's always a dark element to it, even if it's not the main thing sitting in front of your face. This isn't the main thing. There's a lot of the world and the politics. They go into some really, really dark things, and it's hinted at throughout most of the story with some reveals, but nothing too grandeur that I think takes away from the coziness and the vibes that he's trying to give off. But here's the thing, if I want to read a vibey book, I know to pick up a T.J. Klune, so I need something more than that now, because I've read a few of these. I need something to push it beyond the envelope, and here I felt like it stayed there, and the darkness it was very like passing, and so that couldn't bring in a new element, and the characters are pretty much characters I've seen before. Nothing as good as some characters in the past. I just couldn't really grab on to anything that I truly was like, oh, give me more. And so I landed on a 3. I think it's an average book in my opinion, with some good elements, but not excellent elements. I read the entirety of Happy Place today by Emily Henry, and unshockingly, it is a 5-star. I don't remember exactly what I rated Book Lovers, because I don't think I rated that one a 5-star, but Beach Read was a 5-star, this one was a 5-star. I'm wondering if People We Meet on Vacation will be a 5-star, if her newest one will be. I loved the characters of Harriet. I didn't actually care for Wen too much. I think he's a good, like, love interest, but I think he's pretty much a character type that Emily Henry likes, and that's fine. I have a character type that I like, and everybody has their types of characters that they like for the romances. And honestly, to be fair, Harriet as a character, the story itself, didn't start vibing with me till about 50% into the book. There's a dual timeline perspective going on here. We're talking about their entire relationship leading up to the point that they are at inside the novel, and we're actually talking about where they are at in the novel, because with the novel it's all about them going back to this like beach house or whatever for one last weekend with all their friends, but they're supposed to be engaged and they end up breaking up the engagement, and they've been broken up for about 6 months. And so the whole story takes place over this one weekend, but also all of this backwards time. And I think it's the best portrayal I've seen of a second chance romance in a long time. I think it's because the split was just only 6 months apart, and I think the detail going backwards and showcasing all these relationships really just made the ending so beautiful, so perfect. Like 5 stars. 5 stars. Favorite romance I think I read this year so far. Damn, good. It's a good book. I recommend Happy Place by Emily Henry. I thought I would like it, and I did. Succeed. Yeah, I like the writing. I like I said, part of the characterization. Obviously, the audiobook is narrated by Julia Lewin, which is a phenomenal narrator, so like winning on all parts here. Overall, just a good fucking time. It has like a lot of good tropes in it. I think the tropes are easily woven in without being like super obvious the tropes are there. And I did read it in a single day. Like I read the whole entire thing in a single day. So all these things are wins in my books. Let's do our first update for Yellowface. Originally I was going to update you guys at the 25% mark, and then I kind of got distracted doing other stuff, and now I'm like 48% into the book, and so I figured this is a perfect time to come in here and talk about it. I can give you my first thoughts on the main character and the story and things. It's really interesting. Some of the backlashes this author is facing, so let me quickly tell you what it's about. So the initial pitch that I had was that there was a girl named Juniper Song. It's not her full name, it's her middle name, and she knows another author named Athena who ends up dying of a freak accident, and she happens to notice that her manuscript was done, her newest manuscript, and the difference between Jupiter, oh my god, I cannot say the name, and Athena is that Athena got success praise for her debut novel, whereas Juniper, who had basically a self-memoir style novel, got panned, and so she's basically seeing nothing, whereas Athena has all these book deals, movie deals, whole 9 yards going for her. And after this freak accident, she thinks that she could take this really early on first draft of a manuscript and build it into something absolutely beautiful, absolutely amazing, and try to sell it herself, because she realizes that if she gives it up after she's done all this work and she says no, it's actually Athena who wrote this, she'll get no credit for all the work that she did. That's kind of the pitch for it. I would say that Athena probably dies within the first like 10% of the book, so I would definitely say it's the pitch, and she grabs that manuscript and she tears it apart and she makes it her own, and it's a really interesting viewpoint on publishing. It's also a very interesting viewpoint on characters, because I would say for the first 25 to 30% of the novel, I think R. Kwong really made us seem like Juniper could be very likable, even though that she's doing something extremely despicable. So here's the thing, it's the whole conversation on who should write stories based on like their own tellings and stuff. This is a war-based story. She ends up stealing about Chinese workforce in World War II, World War One. It's like this big epic of a thing, and it's nothing like she's ever written before, or nothing like, that like they basically had to rebrand her and everything when this book deal like comes about and things. And she sees massive success. They end up branding her Jupiter Song instead of her original name, because Jupiter Song seems a little more what's culture appropriation. It's really interesting because some of the comments and stuff is really interesting as well. Like when they're going through and editing throughout the book, I felt like that was a really interesting process, because for instance, like if Athena had written it, I don't think they would have cut out like any of the things that they talked about cutting out for this book. And then because she wrote it, and because she wanted to white colonize it, I guess in a way, she wanted to whitewash the entire story, she took out almost all the parts that were very true to the original. So it does make it her own story that she is selling, but it also kind of fucking, it's gross. And like I said, I see like the first 30% or so, I think R. Kwong really tried her hardest not to make her like likable and lovable, but to make her seem sympathetic, so you can be behind the actions that she's doing, because they're horrendous, right? And then there's a point in the novel, I'm not going to spoil it, that it becomes very clear that she's very much aware of what she is doing, and she very much wants to silence anybody and everybody who is making comments of the such. There was an interesting little side plot that ends up happening, that she ends up going to like this church group that is all filled with Chinese Americans, and they're all talking about how much they love this book and how much this book meant to them, and it's the first time in the novel that she really feels like maybe this was a bad idea. And then literally like 2 weeks later, she gets a movie deal and she's like, you know what, this is great, I don't care. And then in that movie deal meeting, I guess there's a lot of spoilers, I'm so sorry, but in that movie deal meeting, she's like, oh, you can put Anne Hathaway in the lead role or whatever. Like, that's insane. Like, obviously, we don't want Anne Hathaway in the lead role if this is either way, it's a very interesting and very, I think, appropriate conversation to have. And I think it's done really well. It's also, once again, interesting from the standpoint of we're talking about a story that is told from a Chinese American, and she's writing a white author who is extremely problematic and doing something extremely problematic to kind of phrase her point even louder. And I think she's doing such a beautiful job about it. This isn't a book I would recommend to everybody, but I think it's a book that needs to be read by a lot of people, at least from what I've read so far. So yeah, I feel like I'll probably come in with a final check-in for this one, just because we're already halfway through it. Also, interestingly enough, I still have yet to figure out if there's any fantasy elements in Yellowface. We haven't hit the halfway mark, so it could show up. She's thinking she maybe is seeing her ghost, and I would really like that explored, because I think that's one of my favorite things that R. Kwong does, is like a fantasy element. This one's kind of fantasy based. Poppy War, which I did read, was very fantasy based and beautiful and harrowing to read as well, and so I'm just really enjoying all these dark tales that this author is coming up by. I'm coming in here to tell you guys that Yellowface was a 4. Obviously this is much later on. I finished this back in September of last year, so it's been a hot minute since I read it, so I couldn't tell you exactly why it ended up being a direct 4. My review says I think it's a 4, so we're going to go with a 4. I remember really liking it. I remember really enjoying everything that was talked about. I remember the ending not being exactly what I wanted, and so I have a feeling that's probably what it was. That being said, let's move on to the next book. Pageboy by Elliot Page. This was a 5-star. I enjoyed this audiobook quite a bit. This one obviously follows Elliot Page from the time he is very little to the time of now, when he was writing the book, like most memoirs, especially very familiar memoirs of today. But unlike other memoirs I have read this year, both informative on the subject matter that obviously we're talking is trans identity and things under those lines, but it's also very much his story. And I think adding both combined, like together, tells this beautifully, wonderfully raw, but also informational story from someone, me. I've grown up with quite a few different trans people around me for the majority of my life, and they have been in segments of transition in different points of their lives. I've known someone since they were like 12, and, you know, seeing them grow, now they're like 23, you know, type of thing. It's like, I've seen this progression of them becoming them true selves and things like that. And so reading it from Elliot's perspective, Elliot started to realize that he didn't feel right in his body when he was 4 years old. And so he started to see that progression, and he realized that, yes, in life at this moment at 4 years old, this was back in like, you know, 1990s, he realized, okay, I can push the envelope so much by cutting off all my hair, wearing more manly clothing. But here's the problem, is that he is an actor, and so he got labeled a lesbian really early on, and that's how he felt represented for a very long period of his life as well, was a lesbian because of different things and so forth. I remember that being a conversation when Juno came out, for instance. And I like the conversation of the focus on it. Also, I do enjoy the aspect of the two-handed sword of when someone is forced to come out. For him being forced to come out was both a negative for his career, but also a highlight for him personally. Because when he was forced to come out, when people started to just like really think, he had this relief off his chest of like, I don't have to hide this secret anymore. And he felt more bad for the people around him who might be hiding their own secrets because they're obviously directly retied back to him. It reflected horribly into his career because the roles started to diminish, and like his star, which was at one point one of the highest of any career out there, went down to like nothing because that's how Hollywood is, and that's really bad, and that's a whole other conversation that is addressed here, and I think addressed really well. And then like he found his niche, and he found his bearings, and he found everything else, and then he transitioned, and then, you know, this ebb and flow started happening again, and he realized, okay, well, I just gotta do this. And I think it works so beautifully, and I think he writes it so beautifully that, one, if you're wanting to learn more about the subject matter, this is an excellent story to follow. But two, if you're trying to figure out things on your own, this is also an excellent story to follow. So I could not recommend this book enough. I don't know if I did it justice. We'll figure out in editing, but with that, it was a 5-star. I just absolutely adored this. I finished this book. Super Nitrate, this author who's been recommended to me a shit ton of times. Magazine Gothic he's recommending, so I think I will give the author another try. This did not work for me on multiple different levels. One, I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I wasn't really sure what it was about. I knew it was about movies in the 80s and cultists, and I figured it'd be more culty, and by the end it turned really culty, but like in a fun culty way, so I didn't really like that. I found the characters to be okay. Like, I wouldn't say they're extremely dynamic. I would say the main character gets very extremely dynamic by the end, but I also feel like that's like a teleplay throughout most of the book. So like if you're here for that twist, I don't really think it's necessary to read the book. My biggest complaint, and I think my biggest takeaway why this is getting a 3, which I think a 3 is fine, I think it's a good number for the book, is because it should have been a novella. Like, if this was like 100 pages shorter, more condensed, more like confined, I think this could have been like a 4, maybe a 5. It could have really done something. I don't really think I like the concept enough to make it a 5, but I think it could have been a higher 3 or a higher 4. This was obviously on the Goodreads choice. I don't know, did this win the Goodreads choice award for 2023? I don't remember, but I'm not mad that I read it. I just wished more came out of it, and because I was really looking forward to it, obviously being on this list, it is slightly disappointing. It was not anything higher than a 3, but that is where we're at. This follows a film sound editor and an actor who ends up getting in cahoots with a man who directed a film back in the like 40s or 50s of the horror film. They call it something yellowy thingy or whatever, and he believes that he has been cursed ever since due to not finishing this film, and so they take it upon themselves to finish that film, and then we have the, you know, what happens afterwards type of thing. And for the most part, it was fun. It was exhilarating. I just didn't really think the scares were that scary. I just didn't think the writing was as amazing as some people have made out her other books. And maybe this was just not the, you know, maybe it's the third book syndrome or something like that. Because I've heard nothing but good things about the previous one. And even like the one before that. No idea. But I didn't really care for it. Just an average 3. Being said, I'll update you guys once I read the next one. And that is Immortal Longings by Chlorine. I adored this book. I had a feeling I was going to adore this book. I've had many opportunities to try to read this in 2023, but I'm not mad that I got to it in 2024 towards the end of February. I thought this was a fabulous time. Well, I read These Violent Delights a long time ago when the second one I think was coming out in that duology, and I didn't really care for it. I felt like there was something here that I could like, but it was too YA, and Chlorine's writing was not hitting exactly how I was hoping. This, I think, was exactly what I wanted. It's not a perfect 5. I would say this is like a 3.75 to a 4. I would read the sequel or the series that follows for sure. I'm very invested in this world. I'm very excited to read the next one when it comes out in September of this year. The differentiate, the one that makes it like a little bit different from the other one is, I think the power set, as it does become very cool by the end, I think is somewhat confusing until about halfway through the novel. I feel like if it had a little bit more ground running, it could be done well. Also because of how much info dumping is in the first half of the novel, I feel like not explaining the magic system to where I would like, I think was the hindrance. The story follows a whole cast of characters, with 2 really main people that stood out to me were August and Kala. Kala is someone who is hunting down and trying to get revenge on this like king and queen type of thing, and she's helping someone to do that. And then we have August, who's also doing something very similar. They ended up in this game that they throw, this kingdom throws every year. We have to have wristbands in this world. You can switch bodies, you can switch to somebody else's chi, and I thought it was really cool, and I thought the concept was really cool. I just don't know how much I love the execution, and if it was done to its justice, in my opinion. But overall, I had a great freaking time. It's family lore because it is the one I didn't like the most. I think it's by far up there with like it's a 3.25. We'll start with that. Okay, this was originally a 5-star prediction. I pulled it out for a 5-star prediction vlog. Obviously that vlog, as you guys have seen, didn't end up happening in that video because I wanted a book that could be more like a 5. I knew really early on that this was not going to be a 5, but I wanted to know like how I was going to feel overall because I love Elisa Salcedo as a writer in general. I just love her writing. I love her work. I love her poetry work. I love what she does. I love that she goes out and she does all these amazing things. I love how these stories truly do help people learn and like motivate them and also teach them about different like lives. I think Poet X was like one of the first ones that like I truly like, I don't know, it was revolutionary to me when it came out, when I read it back in high school. So I was like really looking forward to reading Family Lore. You know, Family Lore is Lives of Pupets' first like adult novel, and so I had a lot of questions about that. I had a lot of questions overall, and I'm gonna report to you that I didn't like it. Didn't hate it. I felt like some of the prose and stuff were beautiful. Obviously speaking, you know, Elisa was a phenomenal writer. I just don't think the story was what I wanted from her. That's not to say maybe it was a story she needed to tell. The only person that I found to make a great comparison, like when you're trying to like, you like this, like, you know, you might like this or whatever, is Kayla. In a video back in September, she read it and she had mentioned someone who like maybe like Encanto. I wouldn't recommend it to the person who likes Encanto. I think this is a bit more out of that range, but if you're looking for a story that's similar, I would go with this one. Just for the simple fact, it's also about a family, a multi-generational family. It does get powers over time. Some powers are small, like nothing, like they can do like random little things. Other powers are connected to someone's vagina. Then some people can do like bigger and outrageous things. And the story follows this countdown to a funeral that is being presented by someone who doesn't feel like they're worthy, and so they want to put a funeral on for their family so they can feel like they're worthy, is essentially like what the answer is. Overall, I felt like the characters were just not round enough for my own personal liking. I felt like when they showed up, they did what they needed to do for the plot and or a little bit of development and a little bit of commentary on whatever they're talking about, and then they would move on and swiftly would move into a new group of characters that would do the same exact thing for the course of 300 or so pages, and then we would get down to the actual countdown, because like I said, this whole book is leading down to this big event, and I felt like the big event sure was exactly what I thought it was going to be, like, to be fair, but it didn't do anything special. And overall, I don't really think I have enough to add to this conversation to bring the story even further past those points. I hope it makes sense. I hope my thoughts make sense. I felt like the writing was pretty good, but I would definitely pick up more. I think this is like my first 3-star for Lives of Pupets. I think everything else has either been like a 4.5 or a 5, and so I will continue to pick up this author for years and years to come. It's just like Angie Thomas. Like, sometimes you're just gonna read a book where you're just like, this wasn't for me, but I can't wait to read what they would do next. I definitely read more from her from the adult section. I hope it's handled a little better. I feel like there's certain things in here that were talked about that have like a slight commentary issue on them, which I think it's important. I think it's very true to Lives of Pupets' writing in general, and I think she does it really well, so I'm not mad about it. I just don't think it was done particularly well here, and I don't know if it's because it's so graphic in its nature, or if it's because, I'm assuming it's because it's graphic in its nature, Because everything else in Lives of Pupets is like when she's adding a layer of extra like realness, or she's trying to bring in a real world problem or something out of those lines, something that she thinks that she needs to talk about because it's important, which it is important, and these things do need to be talked about. I think handling it under a YA scenario, she is put in a position in the writing that she can't go further with it. And I think holding back, I think, is what made her excel before. I think in an adult scenario, there's several scenarios inside this book that made me truly uncomfortable because, one, they were uncomfortable, but also because I feel like it went even further than like where I was hoping it would go. I think she felt like she could go further because of the adultness of the book. I think that's really just what the answer is here. So essentially, I read 23 books, 22 books. Like we said, we talked about Dragonfall already. So let's go through them step by step. I own a few of them now, so I'll hold up the copies that I do own when I get there. That being said, starting with The Stolen Air by Holly Block, I actually have a whole review about this. I think I gave it like a 3.5. I don't know if I'd recommend it. Most people ended up liking it though. Was not my favorite thing. Then we have Lost in the Moment and Found, another video I think it popped up in, I have a feeling. This one was a better one in the Wayward Children series. I gave it a 4. Next one being Hellbent. This is the Barnes & Noble, which is why it's red, by Lee Verdugo. I have a whole review talking about this book. I highly recommend Hellbent. It probably is I think it was my favorite book of the year last year. Could not recommend more in my life. We have Chain of Thorns. I have an hour and 45-minute video detailing every experience I had while reading this book, but also I will have to say where to go next in case you guys are curious. With that being said, I'll point you over there. We have Pamela Anderson. I do think I vlogged this as well. Once again, I'm going to try to link all of the vlogs down below with the books when they're connected and stuff. This was a 5. I would recommend it. I do think it's scatterbrained, but in a good way. Then we have Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm so excited the sequel is just about to come out. It should be out by the time this video comes out, which is so crazy. I'm so looking forward to it. I'm about to do my reread of it. This was a 5. I have a whole video talking about though. Technically, it's a spoiler for that video, but it doesn't really matter. Then we have Broken Perfect Lies by Katie Weismer. I did very much enjoy this release. It took me much longer than I expected, but I ended up really loving the characters. I feel like the ending was a little shaky, but it was a 4.5. Would recommend. The writing trait got too weird for me. I don't remember exactly what I rated. I think a 4, but would recommend. Brothers and Sisters Into the Forest, once I realized the age gap was actually not real. I wish I would have finished it because I feel like it would have been good, but it was enough. The Witch and the Vampire was such a disappointment. I would not recommend. House of Good Bones, I also would not recommend, but then again, most people love it, so maybe I would. I also read Chlorine. I don't think I vlogged my experience while reading Chlorine. If I did, I'll link it. I loved Chlorine. It was like a 4.5. It was so weird, so gory, but in the best way. Lives of Pupets by TJ Klune, I also didn't really care for very much. I'm not really enjoying TJ Klune as much as I did initially, so we'll see if that continues to happen, as I think I have another sequel on my list for him this year. Emily Henry's Happy Place was another one of my favorite books of the year. I don't think a 5. If not, it was like the closest it could be to a 5, so I could not recommend more. The Last Word by Taylor Adams is a fun suspense novel if you're looking for something kind of corny and very brutal. The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw was a novel that was both fun but also like okay. I read both these for a single video in case you want to check it out. Yellowface by R.F. Kuang was supposed to come out with a Babel video. Once again, Babel will eventually get read. I just haven't had the time. But I did love Yellowface. I had some very interesting thoughts coming out of it, and I still think what they're doing with it is so cool, and I like how other projects are starting to adapt from it, and I hope that credit is due because there really wasn't a project like this before R.F. Kuang. I'm sure there were, because I can think of a few off the top of my head now I said that, but like this was like the first one I think really erupted a conversation that needed to be had. Pageboy by Elliot Page was a great memoir, could not recommend more. A Twisted Love Story is one of the worst books I read that year, so no, skip it please. Still Nitrate was super disappointing, and I can't tell if I'm going to continue on with this author's work or not. I wanted to love it so much. I think I have another one of hers on this list because I think they just sound so good. Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong was exactly what I wanted it to be, so I could not recommend more. And Family Lore by Abby Salcedo just did not go in any direction that I personally wanted to go in, so I was so mad and disappointed, which is what most people had told me who had read it before, who knew my tastes in books and my tastes with that particular author. And that's my 23 books I read in 2023 for this video. Once again, I'm doing a very similar video for 2024, which I'm very excited to get out to eventually. I'll link you over to that video where it says it for 2024. We're currently going through like a mix-up. There's a few titles in there that I didn't realize were authors, or there's a title in there that I ended up learning more about that I didn't like, so I'm interchanging it with another title. So it's not the exact list, but that's the closest you're going to get to an exact list. For it, I do have a Goodreads, what's that called? File thing, you know, where you can click on it. It goes to the, what's that called? I'll link it. Just click on the link. That sounds weird. But if you click on the link, it'll go to all the books, and so you can actually see what the actual list of 24 books I plan on be reading for you guys this year. I've already read one. It was not great, but that's okay. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll talk to you all next time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.